This is a quick demonstration that I threw together that uses Waitr-Webdriver, Tiny TDS, and Ruby. So what it does basically is it reads file input from a comma delimited text file, inputs it into a web page, saves that data to a Microsoft SQL database, reads the data back out that I need, along with some more information from a text file, and puts that into another web page, and then deletes the data from the SQL database via a web page click. So let's get started on a quick discussion of what it does, which is pretty simple actually. Basically what I have here is I require Waitr-Webdriver, I require Tiny TDS, which I use to interface with my SQL. And for this little demonstration, I'm going to use Firefox. I have a class that I call my repeating items. So it's basically three things that if I was actually going to make a long test scenario, I might use more than once. In this case, everything pretty much gets used once and that's it. And basically I have a file open, which opens the two text files that I have stored locally. I have a method that's also called create new player, which will actually take the information from one of the text files, splits it into different lines via the comma, and then puts that data into the SQL database via a web page. Then what we have is we have a little method called create new team, which really doesn't create a team, it just actually takes the key that was created in my SQL database when I create a new player and takes the payout information, which in this case is another text file, and merges the two together, stores that into the database, and then that's about it for that. So then we move down here to where I open up my names text file, which will have a first name, a last name, and a handicap. Then I create the new player using my create new player method. And I go back in. For some reason I reopen my test names file. And I believe I did that because I couldn't get it to work correctly without reopening it once again. So then we move down here to where I actually create an SQL client that goes to my database, logs in using a username, password. I have a local SQL Express server on my machine, and my database table is called Golf League 1. My SQL variable here is actually my SQL statement that I'm going to execute using Tiny TDS client. So then once you run or execute your SQL, whatever you want to do, in this case mine's a select statement, I have it returned back as an array into a results field. So then I split that. It's separated by spaces. So I'm going to split my array into usable data. So then I loop through here, do my splitting. I'm actually going to compare what I found in the database to what I have actually stored in my text file, make sure that it got written correctly to my database. So then we come down here, the next SQL statement that I'm going to do is get back the player ID from the player that I created, and that's actually a key field in my database. So I'm going to use that in my teams item, so once I have that matched with how much money they won, if I ever want to find out who's in that related to that key, I can go back into my players database and match it up with the key, and I'll know everything about that person. So then we're going to go up here and we're actually going to put this data into the database. My R line 2 is it's actually my text file. Browser is my client. My results is actually what I read back out from the SQL statement. And then down here I'm going to do a join. So I'm going to do a select on my players table, trying to get first name, last name, and person payout is from the teams table. And then I'm going to do a join on the players and on the player's ID, so we can match those two and get the correct data back out. So then here I have my SQL results, which once again is an array. And then down here I split it, and then I'm going to print out the data that I found, and then I'm going to close everything up. As far as my SQL client goes, I'm done reading from my database now. And then I want to get rid of my players so my list doesn't get too long. So I go through and I actually just step through hitting the delete button until there's no more players left. And that's basically it. So we'll do a quick demo right here. And you can see it stepping through, creating all my new players. Now it's getting the player ID, the key field, and creating my team, each person and their payout for what they won in that tournament. Now we're deleting everybody. And that's pretty much basically it. So then you kind of a quick step through here in case anybody wants to actually see what's produced out when it runs. So basically we have here, we're requiring our WebDriver, our tiny TDS. We're actually going through, loading our browser up. This is our methods, which not really doing anything at this point. We go down, we open up our text file, create a new player using that text file. We go down here, we're going to read back out the data that we put in there, make sure that it was correct. And from that we're going to go up, we're going to actually start creating our teams. Step through here. Kind of goes back up through our methods. This is where we're doing our checking to make sure that everything was put in correctly for the players. And we have our SQL select for our player ID so we can create our teams. And we kind of run through here, we're doing our join, and then we're checking to make sure that our join actually got us our results back. Actually printing out our numbers, not quite in a formatted sequence, but works fine for what I'm doing here. And basically that's all there is.